Okay, you know what it is on day 2 of our articles of the week. We always look for textual evidence, and we are still practicing how to cite what the text says explicitly, which means it's right there in the text. You can put your finger on it. And then we also are practicing citing evidence based on inferences drawn from the text. And it's not as explicit. You can't necessarily put your finger on it. You have to look for clues to help you make an inference, and those clues are going to be your text evidence. Okay, so we're going to practice the explicit first. That's the easiest, and you should have a highlighter and a pencil at your desk. You're going to highlight the evidence with a highlighter, and with your pencil, I need you to write the number that corresponds to that evidence in the margins. Don't write with your highlighter. The highlighter is only meant to highlight. It's not meant to write. Okay, it's hard to read. So you should have your copy of the article on your desk as well. And we're going to go through each of these together. So number 1, it says find the evidence that explains how radio waves were used. So if we go back to the article, usually these go in order of the article, so I'm going to go towards the beginning of the article. The introduction doesn't really get into the details of the invention. It just kind of tells us some basic information about the radio and the invention. If you go into the early years, you start to skim. I'm looking for the term radio waves, and there it is. Radio waves, or electromagnetic waves, were used for communicating over long distances from a transmitter or receiver. So we're going to highlight that. Let's see, I'm working here. I need to make sure that I'm in the highlight text box, comment, markup, text highlighter. There we go. So we're going to highlight that second sentence, and then we are going to make sure that we number that number 1. And remember, that sentence was explaining how radio waves were used. Okay, they were used for communicating over long distances from a transmitter to a receiver. Good. Number 2, it says find 2 sentences that explain why Americans loved Roosevelt's fireside chats. Well, this one will be easy to find because we have a whole section named or titled Fireside Chats. So we need to find 2 reasons Americans loved Roosevelt's fireside chats. Why did they love them? So it says during World War II, Franklin, he developed a show called Fireside Chats. Americans loved this time with their president and felt he was speaking directly to them. During his 12 years as president, he gave 31 radio addresses. He explained his policies and decisions and gave updates on the war and the nation's struggling economy. Americans love Roosevelt's calm and confident voice in a time of uncertainty. So we're going to highlight this last one. That for sure is one reason that they loved the fireside chats. So I'm going to highlight that. And it says we need to have 2 pieces of text evidence. Let's go ahead and put in 2A, even though that's probably going to come after the other one. That's okay. It says they loved this time with their president and felt he was speaking directly to them. We're going to go ahead and highlight that one because that specifically says why they loved his fireside chats. So we're going to put 2B up here. And you can put 2A and then 2B down here. It doesn't matter the order. As long as you have both of them labeled as a 2, you're going to be fine. All right, we're going to go back to number 3. Find the sentence that reveals the name of the show that gave artists a platform for music. Oh, we need to find a name of a show that gave artists a platform for music. So I don't think it was War of the Worlds because that's just about the radio play. Let's go back up to the golden age. So it was credit for uniting communities. Okay, it opened up a whole new world for music and listeners. Future musicians were inspired by what they heard coming across the airwaves. Famous symphonies began to broadcast their performances. Country music did especially well on the radio, with shows like the Grand Ole Opry becoming platforms for talented artists. There's that word, platform. So we're going to highlight that sentence. And the Grand Ole Opry is the title of the show. We're going to highlight that. And we're going to give that a number 3. So double check. Find a sentence that reveals the name of the show that gave artists a platform for music. Yes, that's correct. See how I go back and double check just to make sure I chose the correct piece of evidence. Always double check. And then our fourth and final explicit piece of evidence is find the sentence that explains why President Roosevelt named his show Fireside Chats. Again, this one's going to be easy to find because we can use the header Fireside Chats to focus our attention. So it says he developed a show called Fireside Chats. The name came from the presumption that families would gather beside the fireplace to tune in. So presumption means you just assume. He just assumed people would kind of gather around the fireplace. The fireplace really is kind of the heart of the home. So that's where families usually come together during this time period. So we're going to go ahead and highlight that yellow, and we're going to label this one number 4. All right, so we've made it through our explicit evidence. Now we're going to go into evidence where we have to draw inferences. So these are a little bit harder, but not too hard for you. Number 5, it says find one piece of evidence that shows that radio became very popular throughout the 1930s. Find a piece of evidence that shows that radio became very popular. So we need to find some evidence that shows its popularity. So it says 1930s, and there are a lot of dates in here, so I'm going to search for numbers first. It says 1920, 1930s. So it says the golden age of radio began in the 1930s and lasted until the 1940s. In the beginning of the decade, about 12 million Americans owned radios. By 1939, 28 million people had radios. Now remember, we're looking for evidence that shows the radio became very popular. Wouldn't that show the popularity? It grew from 12 million owners to 28. It more than doubled. That definitely shows popularity. So I'm going to highlight those 2 sentences to show the growth in the radio sales. And I'm going to number that number 5 because that's an inference we can draw. Well, if it's doubled in sales, it must be popular. That's an inference. All right, number 6, find one piece of text evidence that makes you think families benefited from the invention of the radio. So we need to find some evidence that makes you think families benefited from the invention. All right, so where are we going to look for it here first? Let's see, during World War I, this is military. It's not really focused on families, so I'm going to go down to the Golden Age. It said radio opened up a whole new world of music for listeners. That doesn't really focus on families, though. Oh, let me go back up here. I see the word families. It says it was credited for uniting communities and families as they gathered around for the evening broadcasts. Let's go back and check the question again. Find a piece of evidence that supports the idea. Find a piece of evidence that makes you think families benefited. That's definitely a benefit. Uniting a family together, just like in this picture here, that's a benefit. It's good for the families to spend time together. So that's an inference I'm drawing, but I'm going to go ahead and highlight that one, and I'm going to number it number 6. Oops, my highlight didn't work. Give me one more try at that. Highlight, and then number 6. Except I don't want that to be yellow. I want it to be black. Okay. We're almost done. We have 2 more. Number 7. Find one piece of text evidence that supports the idea that War of the Worlds was meant to be a fun holiday celebration. It did not turn out to be fun for a lot of people, as you know, but it was meant to be fun, a fun holiday celebration. So we need to find some evidence that supports that idea. So we're going to go down to the War of the Worlds section. It says one of the most famous radio plays of all time aired on October 30th, 1938. Members of the Mercury Theater performed their Halloween show, an adaptation of H.G. Wells' novel War of the Worlds. The show was scripted to sound like a regular broadcast, but was interrupted. The fictional breaking news alien invasion increasingly more dangerous, culminating with aliens unleashing toxic gas in New York City. I think that we should probably go back to the beginning of this section. And I think that, let's go back and check. It says, find one piece of evidence that supports the idea it was meant to be a fun holiday celebration. I think it's this sentence here. Members of the Mercury Theater performed their Halloween show. That addresses the holiday part of that question. An adaptation of H.G. Wells' novel War of the Worlds. Adaptation means just a different version of the novel. It's not a novel. They didn't read the novel. They made it into a play. So it was meant to be fun and perfect for Halloween time. So we're going to highlight that one, and we're going to put number 7 next to it. We have one more. Now this last one wants you to find 2 details from the article that support this statement. It says Orson Welles was responsible for widespread panic in New York on October 30th, 1938. So we need to find 2 details from the article that show that Orson Welles was responsible for what happened. So we go back to the text. We keep reading. It says the director and narrator was a well-known actor named Orson Welles. The show was scripted to sound like a regular broadcast, but frictional. It goes into the actual accident here when people start to believe it. It says Welles had told audience that the story was fiction at the beginning of the show, but many had turned it on. Many had tuned in after it began. Many didn't realize the show was fiction. They believed they were really hearing news reports about an alien invasion. By the end of the show, word had spread around. The local mayor was furious because small town ops. So I think that the fact that he only announced that it was fiction at the beginning was probably a mistake. He probably should have maybe at certain points, reminded the audience this is just fiction. This is not really happening. And maybe even at the end, he should have told the audience one more time this was not a real account. So I would highlight that first sentence. But it asked us to find 2. And that's 1. And specifically, we need to find 2 that show that Orson Welles was responsible. So I would have to guess that because he was the director, and the director is usually the person in charge who makes all the decisions, that they're ultimately who's responsible for what happens, whether good or bad. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that sentence right there. The director and narrator was a well-known actor by the name of Orson Welles. Because he was the director, we can make an inference that he is actually responsible for the outcome of the show. We're going to label that 8A, and then go back up here, insert a text box, and label this one 8B. Okay? So that covers all of the evidence that we need to find. You should have 10 different pieces, well, not underlined, 10 different pieces highlighted in total. So you might want to double check, make sure you've got 1 through 8, but you should have an 8A and an 8B and a 2A and a 2B, and that totals up to 10. Once you finish this, make sure your name is at the top of your article. And find me in the classroom, raise your hand, let me know you're done, and I'll come by and collect your work.